Good afternoon, everyone. I am Pulkit Gupta, faculty member at VESCO. I warmly welcome our esteemed speakers for the day, trustees of VES, faculty members, architects, students, to the second day of webinar series hosted by VESCOAconverse. Before we start with the event, as a part of VES tradition, I would request everyone to join me in chanting Om three times. Om. 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 Thank you. The theme of the fourth webinar is Alternative Construction Technologies. The webinar is an approach to understand paradigms of design and build practice. On day one, we had two of our speakers, architect Girish Doshi sir and Professor Sankalpa, who elaborated on the emerging construction practices in Indian domain. Architect Shirish Doshi sir elaborated upon various methods of using concrete block technology for load-bearing, sustainable, cost-effective construction. He explained various projects, the detailed process involved in the filler slab construction and ferrogamy for large span buildings. At the same time, on the other hand, Professor Sankalpa discussed the importance of bamboo as a construction material in Indian context. It was a very informative session followed by a panel discussion on the alternative emerging technologies in Indian context. With this, I would like to invite our moderator for the session today, Assistant Professor Abhijit, to take over and continue with the proceedings.
Thank you, Pulkit sir. I welcome everyone to this webinar, all the guests and participants in this meet. In addition, we have about 8,200 VESCO students who are attending this webinar live on YouTube. A warm welcome to all of you. I would now like to introduce our first guest speaker for today, the day 2 of the webinar 4.0, architect Malaksingh sir. He is a Mumbai-based architect, practicing architecture inspired by local alternative building materials, construction techniques, and crafts since 1999. As a student of architecture, he dreamt of creating simple, lesser budget, and sustainable homes which strive to be in sync with nature. Architect Laurie Baker's low-cost housing techniques were then the inspiration for Malaksingh sir to make his dreams come to reality. Having worked with Padma Shri architect Laurie Baker, a pioneer of environmental friendly architecture, Malaksingh sir is now working on propagating Baker's vision all across India. In his professional practice, he has further achieved to make buildings without any cement or steel, preventing tons of carbon emission from polluting the environment by using a traditional construction material like mud, unburnt bricks, lime, bamboo, local timber, and stone to build his structures. He has been an avid believer in learning and passing to the knowledge to the younger generation of students. He has been affiliated with various schools in Mumbai as a visiting faculty and has conducted hands-on workshops in various institutions with the aim of propagating his learning. Many of his students have successfully started their own practice in the field of eco-sensitive architecture. With this introduction, I would like to welcome Professor Malaksingh sir on the virtual dais and begin with his presentation.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I would like to thank the entire team at VESCO, Anand, Mahesh, and Pulkit, and yourself, Abhijit, was just introduced me. So I'm very glad to be invited on this forum. I would like to straight away start presenting my screen and talk about my work. So while the main theme of this talk is about alternative construction technologies and materials, I would like to share my perspective on this. if you can see on the right, you have the structural techniques mentioned as you know, the end result. But there is a plethora of things which actually affect this.
Malaksingh,
Bakerji
sir,
has been, yes.
one small request. Could you hide the stop sharing?
Sure.
Yes. Thank
Sure.
you, sir.
Sure. So Laurie Baker has been my prime inspiration. Bakerji, I have worked with Costford. This is Bakerji's house, and you are all aware of the construction technology template which Bakerji has made popular. So I benefited from that, and this was my first project in Bombay. Since it was in Bombay, it was based very directly on the techniques which Bakerji has propagated, the filler slabs, the exposed brickwork. This is, you can see the filler slab, exposed brickwork. This was the first building of its kind in Bombay back in 2002 or 2003. And we, worked with a very good, able contractor. Tanya Mahajan was my co-architect in this, also my classmate, and we designed this building together. You can see we did a staircase which was cantilevered with just a double kadapa slab. We used second-hand, used wood sections for doors and windows. For the railing, all this was composed out of scrap. We used beer bottles in the wall. We made bay windows with openings below, so that there's good ventilation, cool air can come from below the window, which you can see under the seat. And the primary achievement of this building was it was the first of its kind in Bombay. Here's another example of applying Bakerji's techniques. This was a building in Goa where we used laterite because laterite is locally available. But in my quest to reduce the amount of cement and steel further, I used mud mortar in these walls for the first time, trying to make the walls without any cement. But the slab is a filler slab, and it has mangrove tiles on it for waterproofing and cooling. Here you can see the process of construction, where the bay windows are done in brick, the walls are done in laterite, and the arches were also done in brick, and only the keystone was in laterite because it's very easy to shape a laterite stone at the side. So you can see the mud mortar in the laterite wall here. So this was my attempt to at least reduce the cement. Now this is a building in Gujarat, in Baroda. It's a twin house. It is a house I built for and with my friend, another classmate, Neha Kabawala. This is her house. And those are the drawings where we use the passive cooling features. There's a rainwater harvesting tank. There's a water kund in the center, which makes sure that there is good cooling in the building due to evaporative cooling. That's the chalk you can see. And here again, like I said, it's a filler slab, RCC filler slab, but I tried to remove the cement from the walls. So all the walls are made in lime mortar, including the underground water tank, so that the quality of the water also remains nice. It's plastered also with lime. That's the central courtyard with the water body in the center. You can see the rainwater pipe coming down. The project was not complete then. Here's another project using Bakerji's technology very directly in Mumbai, in Navi Mumbai. It's this now. This one is an RCC framed structure. The earlier three buildings were load bearing. This is framed because we needed to build the house in very less space. So the walls needed to be thin, and we could do that only with a frame structure. So it's RCC, but still we have a lot of exposed walls. Now my primary theory is that we have generally been, academically more studying the monuments or the urban, buildings. There's not enough stress on the vernacular. Whereas the 2011 census tells us that, there's a very large population which is rural, and the urban is still small. So even in 2030, you will have 50% of India still living in villages. So my idea was that, what is influencing their designs in the rural areas, and maybe I should focus in that direction, because enough is done in the urbans, not good enough, but enough. You can see that there's going to be a lot of construction going to happen, almost 20 billion square meters in the next 20 years. And most of it is going to be in the rural and semi-urban areas. You can see that, which are the materials which consume a lot of coal, and coal is not very efficient as an energy source. Also, today you see this is the proportion or ratio of materials used in housing in India, and there's a very large amount of mud bricks and bricks. To make burnt bricks out of mud, this is the kind of distress migration which is caused for the different processes in making brick. So one can think and be careful if one can, reduce the amount of burnt brick also, along with cement and steel, like Bakerji said. Here you can see how, between 2001 and 2011, how the choice of materials has been changing. Now, this is a photograph from a book by Madhav Gadgil and Ramchandra Guha, where they show how we are somewhere in this triangle. It's an iron triangle, and most of our development is dependent on resources which don't come from the cities itself, but from the larger rural, semi-urban, and forest areas. Also, in architectural practices broadly, you have a high-style tradition and a folk tradition, and they are very, very different. So my practice is more tending towards compromising the high style and learning more from the folk tradition. We helped architect Tupti Jadhav develop this project on the way to Pune. It's not Pune really, it's Kopoli. It's a Ayurvedic heart care center where we were, for the first time, I was doing the building without any cement or steel. So it was timber. I was a technology consultant on this. So timber frames for the columns and beams, the roofs. So we almost avoided any cement or steel. Then you can see the walls also. These are done in mud bricks, in mud mortar. So the cottages which contribute to the stay facility for the patients for the heart care also contribute to their health, and they feel extremely comfortable while resting between their training sessions. This is a house we did. This photograph was not when we completed it, but it was a good drone photograph, so we used it. A house at Kudal, just before Goa, and it faces the 180-degree sea view. So you will see the verandas on all the seaside. You will see there are verandas. Now this building here, I was able to now build these buildings without using any cement or steel. Using Bakerji's principles, but trying to use different materials as I go into the rural countryside. So there is no cement even in the foundation of this building. It's laterite stone with mud mortar, lime pointing, timber floor, and timber roof with mangrove tiles. So you can see how the space has turned out. Some places we have also used only mud walls, which means the Cobb technology. This is the first floor. Project was still under completion. You can see the roof, the floor, and you will see a photograph. You can see the plaster is in lime mortar. This is a mud wall. The in between of laterite masonry, we have a completely Cobb mud construction wall, which we have even plastered with mud. So, and then we have had this painted by local painters using local motifs. This is like a veranda, facing the seaside. Now, this is another project closer to Bombay at Kamshet, a homestay, which is now also like very, very successful commercially. So you see the side, you have stone masonry up to around 8 to 9 feet. You can see the model because there are very strong winds, and you can see it's a sloping side. So the rains lash at this building, from the west. So generally you have stone walls in this area. We learned from the vernacular technology. So on the west you had stone walls, on the east you have a veranda looking at a river, which is behind. You can see the roof. So again, this building has no cement or steel in its construction. It's a mud mortar right from the foundation. Local basalt stone, local bricks, timber floor, terracotta tiles, wooden floor. Sorry, I mentioned that. There you can see the wooden floor, lime plaster, the roof in the attic, the first floor. And the house is extremely cool in the peak of summer as well. This is the veranda on the east, where in the further slide you will see the view to the river. But the idea was most of the time is spent by the people in the veranda. So that's how we had designed that space. That's the view from the house to the river. I must say that the client, Armaiti Mewawala, really participated very, very closely in the building. This is my team, architect Dhruang Hingmire and Priyanka Gunjikar, and they were working with me and they were helping the masons build the arches. You can see these arches are made completely in mud mortar, and this is how they look when they're complete. That's the entrance porch of the building. That is how the first floor of the building looks. Like I said, it's a timber floor, and the entire superstructure is timber. So it's partly timber framed, timber post and beam, and partly load bearing structure. And that is how the balcony on the first floor looks. So we like to, have a lot of participation from the clients. So this house, which I'm going to show now, belongs to the same client. After the success of the first house, she had us, design another house in a space very close to this first house. So this comes almost perpendicular. You can see to the right, the house I just showed you, that is latitude, is there in the background. And this is the house in almost like done in the side open space. So it had a linear design, one room after the other, hence the language of arches. This is how both the projects look together from the lower side. It is a sloping side, therefore we had a G+1 situation on the east. And there's a nice view from this side towards the river. That's how both the houses look together. And you will note the difference in language, but there is no change in the material palette. Because we had a narrow series of rooms, so we used a different structural language, but the materials are the same. This is another house near Kopoli, and the same material template really, using, you can see how there's a double height space, and we make use of the veranda and the open space. You can see the planning in the model. Again, no cement or steel in the building, right from the foundation. And all these buildings are done completely by local people. There is no team which travels from one place to another and builds these houses. Every place we work with local people. That's the veranda, where most of the life is generally in these kind of places. I must also say that most of our users, really slowly have shifted more of their life into these houses which we have built. In fact, they spent their entire lockdown in these houses. They did not really come back to Bombay. That's the open living cum dining area, where we did not need to have walls on the side of the veranda. So we made basically a fabrication plus glass wall, so that visually it is open to the veranda on one side. There are no walls as solid walls, but the security and visual connection is there. Here's an example of detailing and how we look at technique, where, so this staircase is made, it's made out of, this entire staircase is made out of the leftover wood from the roof. The This is how a typical bedroom looks with the bay windows, lime plaster, bamboo jigs, and smart lighting. This is how the attic looks. It opens up to a deck. That's another house in Kazakh. Interesting small plan, square plan, but give us a lot of opportunity to make it interesting. Needless to say, non-cement and steel house, mud mortar, right from the ground. So here we were a little more liberal with the use of arches, and we used it to span. Here you can see some construction details of how the roof is done. There's a double clay tile roof, so this is extremely efficient thermally, and there's a very huge thermal difference between temperature difference between outside and inside. Then you will see the wall between the living and dining and a living room upstairs. It's all done in mud mortar. That's how the roof is done, the double roof tiles, so that becomes extremely cool. And we made space for exhaust and diffuse light also coming in. Now we work with different sections of society. This is a community of natural farmers, and there is a tribal family which lives there. So we help them make a house. Needless to say, I think I will not say anymore that we don't use cement and steel. But here you can see a Cobb wall, which is only 9 inches. 9 inches mud wall was done by using intermittent brick piers. This entire wood for the roof is basically from the trees which exist in that area, right behind the house. So we just made a scalable model, and that model was scaled that was a meeting with the carpenter. Model was scaled, so they used it, they took the tree down, they seasoned it for some time, and they used the wood. Also, the treatment for the wood was a kind of alcohol which they make out of mahua flowers. So what we do is we heavily discuss our details, and treatments with the locals, and we keep adapting rather than using one standard detail. Here you can see how we make a 9-inch Cobb wall by putting these stone slabs in between, which later on acted as storage shells. This was a kind of diversity of people who had come from all over the world, I may say, visiting here to work on the house while we build it with our own hands. There were no contractors here. And the house is done at Gudi Padwa Day, and we all had a party after that. So it's a community house done at very low prices with the local people and with people who participated in the workshop. That's the party. Another house, so very interestingly, there's one aspect which I would like to share. So you have this house and this house. These were both inspired, or let's say I had used this house as a reference to show them. This is all in Kazakh. So I showed them this house, and they all loved it. But they were inspired and given confidence by the fact that this can happen in their area, and therefore they asked me to help them with this house and then with another house in this place. So the point I'm trying to make is that our architecture and technology which we use can be very intentionally done so that people can copy the house to learn good things from it. So it's a deliberate attempt to make copyable architecture. Hence, the technology is generally, which I use, is very easy to understand and comprehend. It is necessarily, belonging to the local people, and therefore just adapted by me slightly. That makes two things. One is it makes it copyable. Other thing is makes it buildable, because I don't have to search for a team from somewhere and carry them into this place. I design after finding out what local people can do. So also because of that, I don't have any opposition from the local people that I'm getting outside people to do work. I employ them only, so they actually very happily come and help my project succeed. So this is another house in the same typology, and our details evolve a bit. Here you can see a bay window done completely in timber, so it becomes light. It's almost modular and easy to, and then we can, so these are buildings where the open and living areas are all without any walls, as you can see, whereas the bedrooms have walls. I'm sharing a slide from Bakerjee's book published by Cosford, where he explains the concept of a core house. So if you want to design in a village, in Indian villages, they use a core house as a concept. If you can see these sketches, there is a main building which is a little taller, but it allows for the future expansion on all sides. This is the reality of majority of the population of India, and it should be important to really factor for these things. Here's another case in a house, a traditional house in Wardha, where I've done a building. So it's a classic case, central tall space. These places, this Wardha is one of the hottest places in the country, and nice thick walls. Gandhiji's Sevagram ashram is close by. I use the same local technology. This is the house which I have built, and may I say that I'm extremely happy to know that the house does not look like it is done by an architect, because for me that is the success where local people should be able to build it. These are the details. If you can see the cross section of the house, if you can see the lintel detail to the bottom left, the roof detail to the top right, and the success of this approach is that this is the Cobb Wall being done over there, the thick walls, is that many people have been inspired by this and used these same people to build their houses. So they have built, many other organic farmers have had these houses built there with the same team now. After seeing this so this is the roof where you see a bamboo kind of boarding on which then the further layers were put. This is the internal space where you see, what you see as a raised platform is a dining area connected to the kitchen. These are completely mud walls, 16 feet tall, Cobb walls which are almost 2.5 feet thick at the base. And it's traditional mud, very, very clayey soil. So, trampled by bullocks and, added with all the, stabilizers, vegetable stabilizers, and some details which we evolved with the local carpenters. And here is one of our architects, again, Dhruang, working on a Cobb wall, a 9-inch Cobb wall. This is at the Karjat project, the Vanwadi project, but with bricks, piers. Now, I wanted to draw attention to a model of cultural ecology where Julian Stewart says that, technology is the window through which people may have a look at the environment. So our adaptations are mainly how we use this technology. So unless you understand that the social and the ecological system are continuously related to each other, we will not be able to find good solutions in architecture. Once again, this slide comes up where I will pause at it to explain to you that structure and techniques are an end result of a lot of considerations on the left-hand side. You have to see how people look at materials and how they, what are cultural aspects. And I think these slides will be available with VESCO, and they will publish this, share it with you. You all can go through it in detail. But a physical, biotic, and social cultural environment then can give you, when you consider them together and look at the act of building and how people have evolved these activities of building over time, then you will understand what you need to build, and therefore, you can evolve techniques. In my case, I completely, engage with the local, the knowledge which local people have, and I only design my building afterwards. And furthermore, the details even further afterwards. So I will because I understand that the people I build for have economic have budgetary constraints, and if I use specialists from somewhere else to come and design and build, these people will not afford that. So I work with the local people, but I tweak their understanding and add to their understanding and just develop the designs a little bit so that the same local people can build it. That way, not just the cost remains in control, the local people get work, but also if someone else wants to do it, then the same team can be used by them. So people who want to copy this architecture, and I'm sounding very, very crude while saying this, but I know that most of the architecture or fashion happens based on inspiration by what you see. I'm interested in creating good things to inspire people, good things to copy. When I say good, very definitely with a very clear stand on the environment and on culture. An example is a house which I had done in Palghar, near Palghar. This house was already built on site, but it was, it was commissioned to a local village contractor. And very interestingly, this is what the local village contractor does today. This is the kind of house they are doing in cement mortar using asbestos sheets without any sense of what the slope should be. If you see, there are cement posts used, and now the client himself did not like this house, so he came to me to build another house. So if you see over here, this is the plot, and if you see that building which has been done, like the white spot is the building which they had and they did not like at all. So they asked me, and I suggested that let us bring down this building instead of building another one. Let us pull it down, salvage all the materials in the best possible way. So what we did is we went around looking for materials and local people and local craftspersons. We found a house which was dilapidated. People were ready to give away all the materials. They sold it to us. So that was the client, Keith De Silva. He was very, very sensitive and sensible. So we did a puja and we took up the dismantling of this house. And just to tell you, the beauty of it is that we dismantled this house, but the house we built used the same shape and form of this house. Only, of course, it was 3 to 4 times bigger than this, but the same language was retained of the local planning of a tribal house. The same structural grid was used. So we could also use all this timber which was there from this house. And we made, now if you see the building in the center at that same plot, you see a pyramidal shaped building is what we have done. And this is how that building looks. So we made a house with the same construction planning, the same structural planning grid. We used all the old burnt bricks of that house they had built for the corners and for the corners of these pillars, and at 3 feet height from the plinth level. The remaining bricks which we made, which we used over here, are unburnt bricks. So they are just the same bricks which we picked up from the brick kiln before they were being put to burn. So all these walls are made by unburnt bricks. Only the external walls were made, only the corners and 3 feet walls were made with burnt brick. Here you can see a study of the local architecture. To the top left and left middle, you can see the typical house which exists in that area, the top left. And then therefore when you see this house, you understand how we have used the same construction technology, planning system also. But we tweaked it from within, and we made a lot of verandas in the house. This is for understanding the construction technique. To the left part of the slide is the local techniques which have been there, and the right is what we have done. That's the model of the house. That's roughly the planning sections. Then you see how it has turned out, completely made with local material. The stones for the plinth are taken from the site. Big rocks were broken by hand to make that. The bricks are local and reused. This is the bathroom. You can see that we've made, of course, this was the client's idea. A kind of smokeless water heating vessel is there in the corner in the photograph. Just one glass in the roof, replacing a tile gives enough light. We made a couple of bedrooms which did not have any walls, any windows. We just made a chick out of the local carvi. We made pivoted doors. This is a kind of open dining in a veranda. So we just basically, since it's a modular construction grid, we carved out these verandas as semi-open spaces. That's the kitchen right next to the dining. And all that Kadapa and Kota floor you see is the tiles reused from the previous house which we took down. In the new house, we use terracotta tiles in the floor. The roof has a double tile for cooling. So this is a bedroom where the bed is also basically a stone bed. So is the side table, that is also stone. So it's extremely easy to maintain. And when I said no windows, which means that even if someone hops in and goes to sleep on the bed and leaves, there's nothing for them to take away because the bed and side table, everything is in stone. This is the kind of space that it gives. There are only 2 bedrooms which are like this without windows. The other 2 have proper walls and windows. So this client was very happy. So he also, when he wanted to do a cowshed also, he asked us, he said, I don't want to do a cowshed using cement and steel. You please come and make the cowshed. So that's the cowshed. With proper channel for the cow urine to be collected, the slope, etc. All this is wood which is used, used wood from old houses. Mud mortar walls with beer bottles to take in light and jalis. So we also, take workshops to impart whatever education we can. We believe that students will learn more while working rather than by drawing construction. We also take them to sites. Photographs of some workshops. So breaking is as important as making because then you test how strong it is. And this is one of our favorite photographs because when our craftspeople from whom we learn a lot learn something from us and make a bay window in their house, we feel that our work is successful. Yeah. Thank you.
I think it was a rare occasion on which an architect wants his work to be copied and multiplied by others, which I think is a sign of humility and acceptance that we are a part of the larger society, and our role is to understand our role as a part of the larger society. We will now take a few minutes for a question and answer sessions. Sir, could you elaborate a little bit about the mud mortar and how do we use it? How do we treat the mud, or what care do we need to take while using it?
So every mud is different depending on the geology of the place, the climate. So basically, so different places, different muds have to be treated differently. Finally, you have to be able to have a balance of the clayey and sandy content so that you can use it in a mortar. You can add some additives to it, for whatever reasons that it might need in its specific condition. Maybe if it's very hot or if it's very rainy, etc. You can add some additives to it, but those have to be done very carefully. It's quite fashionable to add cement to it, but I think some good amount of research has shown now that adding cement actually could disturb the molecular structure of mud. and actually affect the bonding rather than contribute. So lime is a better option. Also, lime would help to prevent termites from attacking. So mud mortar is a thing which differs from place to place, but just manage finally the balance of the sandy and the clay content.
So another inquiry would be, we are used to making drawings which we then issue on site and somebody executes it. Of course, all the time an architect or designer might not be on site. So in such cases, we have seen very expressly how you use models to
Yes,
convey your design intentions and details.
yes, yes.
How do you make the drawing so that the people on site can understand? And also, do you sometimes use local language also in drawings instead
Oh,
of
yes.
English maybe?
No, very good question. So we have some of the projects you will see here, especially the Palghar house which I showed you last. There were no drawings issued on site. Leave apart the language in the drawings. So there were no drawings at all because the workers were the tribals. They had their own systems and ways of working. So we had to just tell them rules because luckily the design was modular. So we just had to tell them that this is the size of the room and you have to leave, take the center and put the window in the center. That is the end of the story. There is no drawing required. So, we also customize our language of, instruction based on whom we are working with. And that changes in every site. We don't expect them to understand, all the drawings, which are extremely technical. Those are for our communication for the client. So the model does the big job of it. They really rarely don't understand a model, and we make it to scale. We make it big enough that they can just use a measurement tape and build the whole building. Of course, we use a lot of local language while we talk to them to get their confidence and friendship. So we try and really try talk a lot of local language, both in architecture also and even culturally. And that is why I have named this thing like that. This is basically an approach of cultural ecology, where the environment is not just about nature and trees and soil, but it's also about the cultural environment. So if you respect the people, so what you may do in a 2-year master's program abroad, you'd rather, develop the capacity to gossip with people over tea, and you might learn much more.
Sir, you worked under such like great legendary architect of India, architect Laurie Baker, and we just want to know that what you like you can sum up with certain wisdom of his, like you carried with yourself, like when you worked under him, like any some incidents which strike you, or any some philosophy or any some wisdom which you
Yes.
still carry.
Yes.
So
yes.
if that you can share, it will be a great for us to.
Definitely. One of the most important things I learned from Bakerji is that he never stopped working with his own hands. The first time I visited him, he was around 84, and I went with Sajan sir, Mr. P.B. Sajan, who will be speaking on your platform tomorrow. He was my mentor. He was the person under whom I worked at Costford, and we used to visit Bakerji to have certain discussions. So I went to meet Bakerji, and Bakerji was at 84. He was busy, shaping a brick to make something in his boundary wall. So at 84, he was still active. I mean, he couldn't see from one eye, but he continued working with his own hands. Believe be an architect, then you have to be conversant with the small. And that is, there's no replacement for doing it as by knowing it by doing it rather than by studying it, drawing it. You can't draw construction. I'm sure you can draw, but you can't learn construction by drawing. I believe. The other thing I learned from Bakerji was that, and also from Sajan sir and Costford, was that if your intentions are right, you will not succeed straight away. So don't, you are bound to face obstacles, but never get tensed and think that the world is going to end. If you are on the right path, success is going to come in your way. So they taught me to be a little secure and not get worried. So these are very subtle things which I think I learned and I carry forward. Another thing which, from a good question you asked, Mahesh, was the important thing was to understand Baker's principles. So when I could not use what is commonly understood as lorry baker technology, the filler slabs, exposed brickwork, etc., because I was working in rural areas and I would have to train people, but that didn't make sense because then that would cost the client. I realized that where did Baker's learn from, right? So I thought that I should learn from his teachers. If I can't apply because of my restrictions of having trained masons, blah blah blah, Baker's learned, and from whom Gandhiji learned. So Gandhiji, also Baker's was influenced by Gandhiji. So those were the rural craftsperson.
Yes.
So I realized that my problem or my difficulty is actually an opportunity. That instead of depending on trained masons, I should actually work with people who are trained in sustainable construction without knowing it is sustainable. And I don't have to use filler slab or rat trap bond, or in fact, fortunately, I didn't have to use cement also. Just by working with the local people, and that was Baker's principles are greater than Baker's techniques. Is one great learning which I had, and I'm very proud to say that when I met Baker's son Tilak Baker at a ceremony, at a kind of function in Trivandrum, he said that he saw my work, and he said that Baker's would have been very proud of your work, and this is definitely exactly what he would have wanted us to do. This is the kind of work which he would have wanted us to do. So that is what I learned also, and I'm actually discovering more aspects of Baker's work even after 20 years after I have left that office, because understanding his work and how he percolated in people's minds this concept of sustainability is not easy.
Yes.
And so that learning, I'm slowly, even right now, it is revealing itself to me over time.
Yes, yeah, very nicely, sir. You pointed like it is no point in just taking the technique, but to understand the philosophy and finding new ways to find or tackle the problem. And problem is an opportunity, and that's a nice. That is what we want. Like we should look for. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Malaksingh, for this answer.
Thanks, man.
So there are a few more questions. One of the questions is that, were there any challenges you faced while sourcing local masons or workmen? Were they supportive? And the second parallel question is, after you returned back from Cosford and started practice in Mumbai, how did you start convincing clients on this alternative technology? Can you
So let me
mention some
tell you, it took me
experiences?
almost a decade to get. So now the atmosphere is very different. You have social media, and my students are more famous than me. The people who have worked with me, and they are very effective with social media, so they are more famous than me. I did not have those tools, and I was not interested also. So it took me 10 to 12 years to be able to say that yes, I am not going to look for a job, okay, to survive in this field. I'll be honest with you, there was no awareness at that time. I was the only one around who was trying to do something, barring a few, 1 or 2 here and there. But no one had a successful practice as such. That is one question. The other question was it difficult to convince masons, local masons? It was only, like I said, it was only as difficult as, being humble, giving them respect, talking in their local language, and being able to sit down and have a cup of tea with them and discuss, and then how nice they invite you to their house, they discuss the technology. You have to be brave enough also to say that you have to have your theory strong, your understanding of construction and structure strong, so that you can say that this is sound technology. You have to know what you are going to trust. You have been eating Maggie for 15 years. You have no idea what, unless someone does a research and tells you it's bad, you are not going to question Maggie. But, you will smartly, same thing is for the techniques which you learn, the stuff which you learn in conventional education. You blindly accept it is sound because it is done in some laboratory, or some test results are flashed in front of you, like an FSSAI kind of badge, for this food is good to eat. But I would rather you should know whom to trust and what to kind of, put your faith in. So I put my faith in technology, which is thousands of years of research and development. And they are not tested in laboratories, they are tested in real life, in people's homes. So if that building can last for 200, 150 years, my faith is in that research and development, right? So you will have to get your theories, your concepts. You have to struggle within yourself, in your mind, and know what you trust. Then you will feel confident and you will back yourself in doing things. That is what I did, and that is how getting people was not difficult. In fact, let me tell you, some people have a problem with India being an underdeveloped country. I think it is only because what you consider as underdeveloped, I consider it as our richness, because of which we have anything left of sustainability, is because we are underdeveloped, according to some people. That is only where you find sustainable anything: architecture, food, clothing, lifestyle, whatever you call. So there is tremendous amount of, and now too there is so much unemployment also. So, and let me tell you, today my problem is I don't have enough hands to work. I have so much work and so many people giving me work, and so many people asking for work, that I'm not capable to take that much load. But there is so much work in this field that you should definitely try and make yourself strong in this. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
We have our second guest speaker for the day, Architect Dean D'Cruz, sir. So we welcome you. Let me introduce Architect Dean D'Cruz, sir. He is a graduate in architecture and is actively involved in professional practice as well as in academics. He has constructed numerous workshops and seminars on architecture, planning, and the environment across India as well as abroad. His works and articles have been published in leading magazines in India and abroad. Supported the Royal Art and Architecture Academy Stockholm, Oxford Brookes University UK, and Pratt University New York for their architectural and planning programs in Goa. He is a partner and principal architect in Mozaic Design Mozaic Design Combined, a leading design firm based in Goa, involved in urban intervention, architecture, conservation, product and graphic design. Mozaic strives to provide holistic situations and solutions to its patrons. We at Architectural Wing of Mozaic have designed around India over 250 houses, 50 hotels, 30 housing complexes, and about 30 institutions, offices, and factories. While most of our projects today are in the area of hospitality, we are striving to make social impact in the areas of education, healthcare, and micro eco living. Dean sir has also been a recipient of numerous awards, both national and international. In 2007, a conscious decision was taken to desist from these award competitions. Instead, his involvement has shifted towards providing academic standards and improving them across the country through workshops and master classes, and being a jury member on a large number of award platforms, bringing in criteria that address environmental and social issues. With this introduction, I welcome Dean D'Cruz, sir, and invite him to our platform to begin with his presentation.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you for having me here today. So what I'll do, since it's a fairly junior sort of setup, it's the second and third year, I believe, I'll keep it simple, I'll keep it broad. and basically share my journey. So the title is really from brown to green. So as you know, we started off as low-cost architects, and Baker also has been a great influence to me, like the speaker before me, and it's from these a simple sort of approach to architecture, which was green and sustainable in those days. We never had the term sustainable, to a very conscious level of sustainability that we see today, is what I'll share to you, just with a few examples of projects and where the real approach needs to happen, especially in young minds, and how they can imbibe these basic principles and how they can actually take it forward in today's situation, especially at the time of the pandemic. It's a great time to rethink the way we practice as architects and define really what the world needs in terms of a design approach. Yeah, so I'll just share the presentation with you. So basically, it's from brown to green, as I mentioned. So our early work was influenced by Baker. When I was partner with Jared for the first 8 years of practice, we called ourselves Natural Architecture. Jared had worked with Baker for a little while and had a great influence in me. In college, of course, I was a very technology-influenced sort of person, somebody who enjoyed new materials, new processes, new ways of living. But coming to Goa, and I was highly influenced by the Baker philosophy, which Jared had already imbibed, and got to look at how a softer architecture was actually more valid, especially in the rural setup that Goa is in. And later, of course, as we moved through 35 years of practice, we actually consciously started another approach to sustainability, which involved using technology effectively, using materials effectively, and systems which are nowadays common, say defined by what Terry has defined, the Terry Greer thing. Leeds is defined in terms what are the basic sort of ABCDs of sustainability. So our early work actually understood the basic, the weight of material, the weight of the bricks, the stickability of materials, the strength of materials. And with this, we built buildings which are mainly load-bearing, so arches, walls, domes, a minimum amount of concrete used in the buildings, and sort of shaped the lives of the people that lived in it. Because here was something which connected to the ground. Here was something which can actually see progressing. It wasn't this thing that you cast a slab and you fill in walls in between. You can actually see a building grow. So, and we realized one thing: when building in a masonry structure, it can last forever. So the example is this monastery that we designed, which the Spanish nuns wanted it to last for 400 years. And the only way we could design a building that lasts for 400 years is to do it completely in a load-bearing material, because concrete and steel, which are tensile elements in them, can last 75, 100 years. So how do we actually build that? So every system, right, in the walling system, flooring system, roofing system, was planned to be in masonry completely. And we'll just let little areas for the services to be upgraded whenever they need to. Of course, in the final product, being in Goa, we responded, at least in the roof, to a more traditional looking roof, not a vaulted system. That's the monastery. We've also built in different parts of India. This is the Hampi University in Kamalapur. It's the Kannada University, actually, it's called. And that's just the library building. Library building itself is 50,000 square feet. It's an enormous library building. And here we looked at the traditional architecture of Goa, in which we captured the spirit of it with deep overhangs, the gopuram, the sense of scale and entrance you have to the place. Now, this building has got these 3 giant gopurams, which are the edge of the building, which take in air at a high level, well beyond the radiant heat that comes off the ground, hydrate the air such that there's water sprayed onto it, and can drop the temperature down by almost 10 degrees. And it's taken into the building and escapes through a central courtyard, which has a water body in it. So it's a constant flow of air through the library building, where you can see stacks and reading rooms in it. And there you can see the gopurams and how it moves, sort of thing. So the whole building is just almost completely of stone. And when the contractors wanted to construct it, and we said, you have 6 meter tall columns, half meter by half meter, they said, no, we can't do this. We're used to concrete. So we've done this 200 years ago, so why not do it now, And quickly they got their act together and built this building in stone. So it's very easy for us to recall traditional systems in building. It's still available, and it must be tapped before we lose it forever. This is the cathedral in Karwar, which is just south of Goa, which is, the cathedral, as you know, is a mother church. So it's an enormous sort of church, which can within it seat close to 1,000 people. And outside also there's a platform which can take take 2,000 people in an open air situation. So the actual altar actually moves to the back entrance, and it flips, the whole service almost flips. Here, of course, granite is a local material. Since Karwar is an export zone for granite, all the waste granite that we found from cutting those blocks we use in the wall of the building. And we created just these floating columns. So each column is actually an independent structure, which has a little pad that goes in the ground, and a flaring of a structural system that supports the whole roofing system, like trees almost. Yeah. And the wall is actually non-structural, even though solid stone is just comes up to a certain level, and there's skylights above it completely. So it lends that sort of feeling that you're in a little forest, and it's covered, of course, by traditional roofing systems of wooden rafters and mangrove tiles, which are local to the area. The rafters we got from recycled buildings around the area. But architecture is not just about buildings; it's also about the spaces between buildings. So in this project, which we initially called Country Courts, which is a small hotel project in Anjuna, it's now called Laguna Anjuna. We created a series of streets and courtyards which one moves through. So you have these courtyards of different shapes and sizes, and so circular, square, star, crescent, and the street moves in these courtyards, and from the courtyards you actually enter the rooms. And the rooms also have little mini courtyards of their own, private courtyards. And every room is unique. It's completely different from the next room. And so in this way, we're able to create the sense of interest in the things. It's not like a typical hotel, which every room is almost identical to it. So this is the hotel in which we were recognized for being one of the 100 best small hotels in the world. It's built right on top of a hill. It's called Nilay. It's got this giant pool. So while excavating the pool, all the rocks that we got, we built the whole structure with. And you can see it's a very east meets west sort of architecture. It has domes, it has tiled roofs, and all sweeping. So it's an octopus almost of a structure. It's got a central core to it, and all these arms flow out from the sides. That's the main living room, which is a giant dome. It's about 11 meters in diameter, built completely out of mud bricks and mud mortar in between. Of course, it's plastered over. But it's built in 4 days here. There's no concrete in it. And you can see that traditional systems actually work. They're very economical, they're quick to build, much faster than the new modern systems that we have. It's just a question of recalling techniques and accessing traditional materials. That's one of the rooms. So all the rooms are done thematically. This, for example, the star rooms, you can see the brickwork that's in it. And each room has a different theme to it. That's the central master suite in the place. There's only one concrete column in the whole building, and it enters up to the central roofing system. And the roofing system is made out of coconut rafters. And coconut rafters, like bamboo, is a very ecologically sound material, because coconut rafters are from a renewable source. Coconut grows very fast. There are lots of coconut trees in places like Goa, Kerala, most of the coastal areas in India. And it's considered a green wood, definitely. And you can treat coconut wood such that it can last 100 years, just treating with simple linseed oil. So it's a great material to use. The floors, of course, are just plain IPS floors. Again, an opportunity to actually incorporate the craftspeople into making, handcrafted materials rather than something industrial. So when we're looking at an architecture for Goa, people think of Goa as this place with very pretty looking buildings, big white walls and little shell windows and tall roofs. But actually the Goan architecture is not very climatically sound. It doesn't breathe well. The overhangs that prevent the rain from coming in are very poor, because it's almost like an imported architecture. It has been tweaked here and there, but not enough to really perform climatically. So our architecture is very influenced by an architecture which is further south and which is far more responsive to the climate here, and that's Kerala. So Kerala architecture is one where the roofs sweep tremendously, creating almost pavilion-like spaces. And these spaces actually allow for light ventilation to actually flow through. This particular house actually has in the kitchen, living, dining, almost every room is just interconnects seamlessly and just partitioned off by simple walls across it. So our architecture really evolved into a pavilion architecture for the houses, where rather than putting verandas at the edge of it, we put verandas in between the spaces. So you have an airflow that actually moves through the building, through and through, and you're just creating these connectors which people actually live in. You can see here. So every house is different. The common thread that runs through them is really transparency, an openness to the outside, and openness to nature. While working in architecture, we need to actually look at which area we work in, what are we trying to project in. So this is a spa we did for the Taj. It's an Ayurvedic spa. And Ayurveda actually came from Kerala, and in fact, inspired from a lot of the architecture from the snake temples in Kerala. So we studied the snake temples and looked at the progression of space and the progression of light that we move through the space. And so like a temple, like a typical temple, you have an entrance, of course, you've got so where the deep stambha is, you move right up to the Garbhagriha. Of course, it was a redefinition of what sacred progression is. So in the sacred progression, you really have taller, brighter spaces as you enter, and deeper, lower ceiling, darker inner spaces. And therefore, we consciously ensure that there was a progression in light, was a progression in scale as you move to the space, ending up, of course, in this hall of contemplation, where one side you had a water body, so the light was just bounced off the water, there were no windows. And on the other side, you had a light wall, which is just actually diyas lighting up the inner wall of the building. And each of the rooms were earth, air, fire, water themes of the spa. And so here we're drawing from the spirit of a traditional architecture into a new contemporary use. This is a project in Bhopal. It's on a farmland, old farmland, where we retain half the farmland. And these 30 rooms, which actually face the fields, are like a village, like a little village. So keeping the spirit of the village still going. There are these little pavilions that look onto the fields still. So the rooms, each room has got its own little veranda pavilion, which looks onto it. You enter into a little courtyard, it almost feels like a little village square, and you move on to the rooms. That's the reception area. Again, responding to the traditional elements of the architecture, but introducing a certain level of sophistication in it. So a lot of our work is actually in hospitality, and a lot of our work is in the jungle areas or in eco-sensitive areas. So we have to be conscious of the materials available and the impact that we have on the ecology of the area. So in this particular lodge for the Taj in Pench, there's a lot of fallen trees that the forest department sells, and so the logs are cut up and they're sold. So you're not cutting a tree; you're actually using wood which would otherwise, have gone to waste, but the forest department has harvested them and has sell them for local use. So using the local wood, we created these little pavilions. So there's the dressing area down, and of course the sleeping area on top. So we got local people to actually even make it. People are adept in using wood. And this is for another Taj project, which is in Bandhavgarh, where again we got the local men of the village to actually build these mud walls. But the mud walls are a little more sophisticated than normal. So they're actually double walls. They're actually cavity walls with an insulation in between. So there's very good insulation for these areas, which actually are very hot in summer and very cold in winter. So we have to introduce good thermal insulation, I think. And we also needed to incorporate, all the craft of the area. So we got the women of the village to actually decorate the units, and whatever craft we could get in the area was incorporated into their courtyards, into their rooms. So you can see it's a very simple looking structure, but sophisticated enough for a lodge at the Taj level. Like this, we've been doing a number of lodges across the country, mainly in tiger sanctuaries, some at ground level, some elevated, but all incorporating traditional elements. This is the one we're just completing right now in Kana. So working in CRZ areas, which is another ecological zone, which is on the coast. Again, we're allowed to build just wooden cabins which can be dismantled. So we're looking at an architecture which is temporary in nature, I mean, the Japs are great at that. The Japs are able to build these really light structures which connect with the outside. So in this particular project, we had 4 rooms. So we thought, let's take the seasons, the summer, winter, autumn, fall. So this, of course, is the winter room. We even got a Japanese poet to actually write a haiku on the season of winter. So every room is a different theme. One of the big realizations in working in hospitality was the possibility of actually creating structures which are temporary in nature. Because hospitality they always want a certain freshness in it. And one way to create a freshness is actually renew the whole structure. So this is for the Taj again in Sri Lanka. It's a little beach restaurant. So since we have a product design wing, we're able to actually design everything in complete detail, right down to the furniture, lighting, menus, everything. And we just prototype it and send it across, and they can build it over there. This is another beach shack for the Taj. So this building actually cost just 9 lakhs, complete with lighting, furniture. And the Taj earns 50,000 rupees a night on it. It's a 40-seater restaurant, and they earn a profit of 50,000 rupees a night on it. So in 2 weeks, you've covered the cost of the building. So you suddenly realize it's not only a great ecological approach, it's also a great economic approach, where in normal architecture would take you about 10, 15 years to cover the cost of the building. Here in 10, 15 days, we're actually able to achieve that. So it's a very simple approach. So dealing with the temporary architecture creates an opportunity for us to actually engage in the building process. So this is a pavilion we did recently for the Serendipity Arts Festival. It's a pavilion that displayed actually the Barefoot School, which it's a competition for young architects to propose a craft school for the building industry. So our office actually got our hands together and we actually built this pavilion ourselves using bamboo and steel wire. So again, you're integrating a traditional material with a highly technological material. And that really is the future of architecture. How do we actually be really sensible about the materials we use? Can we use traditional materials in places where it's appropriate? Can we use new technology materials and also in other places where it's appropriate as well? And can we combine it together? Since we are also a product design office, we also look at an architecture which is a product in a way. So this is, of course, a social project which we did for the Danish Aid Agency, which recognized that children of people in the construction industry don't get a proper education. They keep moving every couple of months to a new site. So here we designed a school that actually moves with them. It's called the Moving School. So it's based on a tractor bed, so you can fold up the whole school, take it to a new site, fold it out again, and set up the whole building again for young children to be educated in. So let this we work on a number of projects in which you can keep on shifting, which you can assemble. This is for a lodge on an island, which is just panels of 2 feet by 8 feet, which you assemble together, put together. And every year you can keep on changing the whole configuration. And these wall panels actually also integrate the furniture, and you can keep on adding to it. So even for the public areas, it's a finished product. You can actually create a modular design. When speaking about modularity, this is not a school which actually imbibes the principles of modularity, which is basically a very simple grid. And the grid is just formed by columns, which are actually wind towers. These columns are brick towers. This is in Bijapur, where bricks are easily available. Bijapur also has a high wind velocity, so up to about 26 kilometers an hour. So it's enough to actually take air in at a high level, hydrate it, and bring it down and cool the whole building. And the walling systems are moving soundproof partitions. So you can keep on changing the whole configuration of the school as it's being used. And it's just a shading system, much like a tree, which allows the hot air to escape while the cool air comes in from below. This is for a project in Noida. It's a fully dismantleable building. It's a hollow column, hollow beam system. The flooring is just made out of stone slabs resting on neoprene pads. And all the services, including the air conditioning, actually runs through the building. Often in architecture, we have this clash between structure and services. And we do the structure and we struggle putting the services through the structure. But here we decided to work both with an integrated services and structural system. So you can see the hollow column system. That's the cooling system, green walls, the water bodies below that, and how all various systems that we have. Unfortunately, building is not built because the client was asked for money. The corruption levels in a lot of these cities is very high to get the project passed. So it never saw the light of day. But that's the sad thing about architecture. And we need to, as architects, actually, push against these forces which actually destroy architecture, forces which actually corrupt the whole practice. This is for the Pune municipality. We were shortlisted to design their sustainable building technology center, which is just off one of the railway stations outside Pune. And so we created a center. For us, it's a great learning because it's almost done about 20 years ago. It was the first time to actually look consciously at sustainability, look at technologies, look at materials, look at systems, which had a design sustainability built into it. So this was supposed to demonstrate the basic principles of sustainability. So like an exhibition center or like a science center, people could go to and actually experience it firsthand. So for us, it was a great learning experience. Again, unfortunately, this never got built either. But for us, it was quite a rewarding experience. Yeah. So when speaking about architecture, it doesn't mean that you have to build always. Yeah. Because architecture is not just about building. It's really creating a system of catering and improving to the quality of people's lives. Yeah. So this was for the Maharashtra Tourism Development Corporation. They wanted a 40-room hotel. And so we said, what you want is tourism. So instead of building a 40-room hotel, why don't you give tourism to the people? So in this particular village called Ar.Dean in South Maharashtra, we measured all the houses in the village, and we said, you can renovate some of these houses to create guest rooms, for the farmers, the other traders in the village. And for the fisher folk over there, we created these floating platforms. Yeah. So each room was a hotel room, which could come together or separate on this water. You could, so the fisher folk already had a new form of employment. And the local villagers also could have these little pavilions, either attached to their house or part of the house let out for guests to stay in. So they had a far more genuine experience. And the revenues coming out of tourism would go directly to the people. So they didn't, you gave them dignity. They don't have to work as, bellboys and waiters and cooks in the hotel. They became the owners of the hotel, and collectively they actually ran a hotel in the whole village. And all the money that you normally spend on building a hotel would go into developing the infrastructure. So developing their jetties, their places of worship, their marketplaces, and of course, tourist facilities that may be needed to improve the quality of the area. A lot of my, practice has been actually in activism, connected to activism. I'm part of the Goa Foundation, which actually looks at ecological damage that takes place and fight it through legal means. Yeah. So to keep me quiet, a lot of the times the government puts me on board with a lot of these committees so that I can actually ensure that I'm incorporated and my views are incorporated into whatever planning happens there. And so when I was on the committee to prepare the new regional plan for Goa, the first thing we did, this is along with Charles Correa and with Edgar Ribeiro, first thing we did was recognize all the eco-sensitive zones of Goa, which is the coastal areas, which is the mangrove areas, which is the fields, the forests, the orchards of Goa, the water bodies of Goa, and to protect them. So the first thing we did was actually create an eco-sensitive plan. So defining all the different eco-sensitive areas in Goa, grading them in certain ways, and defining all the watersheds of Goa. So how do you define watersheds? The watersheds are the life givers of Goa. So each watershed actually waters or gives nourishment to a certain section. And generally, a lot of villages are actually built around watersheds. So once you define watersheds, you can also define lifelines to village life. So this is a study of basic watersheds in the area which is the part of the Mandovi watershed, and how we can actually use watersheds as life givers, and how we can actually create communities around watersheds. So life around water, so basically it's the river, lakes, the wells, they are connected through underground stream. How do they connect to each other? And once you define that village, is how can you actually let villages network? How can you actually create network? Because the village cannot survive completely on its own. Each village has a different resource, a different agriculture, a different sort of produce that you can actually trade with. And therefore, looking at the economy of villages and bring them together. So village is a unit of development. A village is a cell. Thus you have, organism. You've got many cells that make up an organism. So a village is an organism that actually makes up a whole region. A village is a cell in that organism. And a village actually consists of all the things that you need, for sustainability of its own. So it's got fields, it's got water bodies, it's got orchard areas, it's got settlement areas, it's got grazing areas. And all this forms an almost autonomous, self-sufficient system. But it does need to connect with others. But recognizing this is where we started the first step in preparing the regional plan, which is basically going to the people of each village and saying, map your village. So using Google, of course, they understood how the layout of the villages, where the fields are, the forests, the settlement areas, and started proposing development. But before they started actually doing development, we needed to make them understand what development and infrastructure was. Because most people, development is buildings, roads, factories, infrastructure, electrical grids. And true, that is development, but that's the gray part of development. That's the hard, dark side of development. There is a much more friendlier side of development. That's the green part of development, which is where we get our water from, we get our food from, we get our the air that sequester carbon dioxide, we get all the nourishments that nature gives. And the area needed for the gray part of it is probably 5 times more than for the green part. So we have the gray part of which is defined in the village, and we have the green part, which is what gives us life. So people needed to understand that before they actually started preparing their village plan. So this is the final village plan of a village close to me, which is the village of Para. And so the people of the village actually started marking not only what existed, but marking all their aspirations as well, which is their where they'd like to have their playgrounds, where they'd like to have their water harvesting areas, what sort of fields they would like, crops they'd like to plant in it. And they mapped out whatever was existing in terms of animal paths, bird nesting sites, and so you can see that it was a connection to nature that was integrated into the plan. And working with them, of course, was to create this excitement about. So it wasn't just a typical thing of dead things. How can we actually make things exciting for, say, people in the coastal areas, and how did it so create these centers where they can actually provide shade, where we stabilize the soil, create water buffers in the forest areas or the field areas. How do we actually connect wildlife in one area? Because biodiversity is an important thing, but biodiversity needs to be connected for it to flourish. Or new concepts of tourism like agro-tripping, which you see in Southeast Asia, which is really people living on the field side, so they connect with nature and not just be on the beach, but really see where their food comes from, how things grow. And of course, the deeper of creating biolinks between all the different dense forest areas. When one is looking at inspiration for architects all over, one architect that really is a big inspiration for me is Christopher Day. Christopher has been an inspiration for me for the simple reason that while he designs houses, he doesn't design for a single person. He designs for many people. So he's not designing houses, individual houses. He's designing communities. So rather than these single wasteful houses, he's actually bringing people together, sharing their resources and sharing their lives. So a lot of these projects actually have common kitchens, common dining areas, common living areas. So people are actually sharing all the normal everyday burdens that they have in creating a lifestyle thing. And he gets them involved in the whole design and building process. So each unit may be completely different from the other, but they have a lot of shared resources that come together. And so you can see how the development process comes together. So they even share in their cooking and taking care of the kids or whatever. So you're building a community, and we've had this before in our traditional architecture in terms of, say, joint family systems, in terms of smaller village clusters, but we seem to have lost it in modern day life. And there are a lot of organizations around India which are actually taking part and building communities again. So you look at Horanashala, which actually started after the Bhuj earthquake, and they actually started rebuilding systems which sorry. And so after the Bhuj earthquake, they actually got people to actually build again and taught them ways, also built their community infrastructure. And we see a lot of buildings which are to do with rural setups are being awarded continuously. I mean, through the Aga Khan Award, through the Curry Stone Awards. These are buildings which are actually bringing communities together. And in some ways, so directly through community centers and other sort of buildings which are together. When you're looking at the future, this, of course, is a sketch made by Corbusier on the future. And it's quite a scary sketch with all these cars and tall buildings and really menacing look. And we think, oh gosh, this is never going to happen like this. But it is, and that's Dubai today. And a lot of our cities actually look at images like this for inspiration and the way they develop them. We need to define where are we heading as a profession, where are we heading in terms of our cities. And today, architecture and nature seem to be at clash with each other because everything seems to be catered for one species, and that's us. Yeah. And whereas nature is all about diversity, nature is protecting all aspects, but here everything is being destroyed just for one species. So we need to redefine what are we doing and how do we actually reconnect to nature. And many people have tried to solve this problem of us spreading all over the place. So one example, which is very utopian, is put all people into one building in the city. So the one building becomes a city. It's enormous, like, 50-story building with streets, no cars, and there's a factory portion to it which produces something and something else with food. And it may sound very efficient, but it's also not human again, because you may be solving the problem of pollution and making things, but there's no quality of life in something like that. You may be saving the greenery, but how do you enjoy the greenery? How do you connect with nature? So it's important that we connect to nature in some way. And somebody like this is an architect soon who I met. He's actually worked on a proposal for Singapore. And Singapore is also a very dense little country. But he proposed to actually make Singapore even denser. He says we must have it compact, so we keep the greener areas more free. So he proposes 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer city with the mechanized economy in the center. The mechanized economy is where actually industry is, where the most polluting part is actually put in the center, where all your trade happens, where all your sales happen, and all the manufacturing happens. And around that comes, of course, the retail and the recreation, and then, of course, the settlement areas, and then eventually the field areas. And the reason for putting the most polluting in the center is, one is it makes it very efficient because your power, transport, everything comes to a core. And the other thing is, because it's polluting, you make sure that it doesn't happen, it doesn't spread. Because if you look at factories today and everything, it just keeps on spreading all over the place, polluting more and more land. Where you put it in an important area, you have far better controls over what happens there and a far better distribution, and therefore a more economical system is evolved. And a 1 kilometer city means everything is walkable because you're not walking more than 500 meters from the core to the outer periphery. So the city is just an assemblage of many smaller 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer cores, and then with fields wrapping around them as buffers. And one imagines, oh, that's futuristic, but it's not, because that's exactly the model of our traditional villages, which has a core and which slowly diffuses to the outside into fields. And therefore, the village model is actually one of the most efficient that we can think of. It's just a question of what do we keep at the core, how do we identify the core as, and how do we actually build into the future. So if we're looking at what happens to our cities in the future, one of the most simplest approaches is really to look at brownfield projects. And the brownfield project is basically one where we're actually using land which has already been wasted into expansion of our cities, rather than go into fields and valuable areas like you see happening in places like Gurgaon. Is identify areas which have already been damaged and build in those areas. So this is a small city, twin city outside Stockholm, which I visited a few years ago. And it's built in an old industrial site. And it's very simple, low-rise buildings, just 5-story high, so no lifts, which connects to the ground. And it's created new communities, which, all the systems of water, food, waste, everything is integrated into one. And so everyone grows their own food in close proximity to each other. While there may be larger agricultural lands around, it's extremely close to the core of the city. And everything is visually connected in some way, creating a new way of living in a very modern setup. And we're looking at a new way of living. It's all about closed loop systems. It's all about how do we deal with energy, waste, water, and make sure that these closed loop, like a traditional village in a way. So there are various movements of slow cities, edible cities, where people are growing things in proximity. And especially in the pandemic, we realized that people want good food at close proximity. They don't want it coming far away, sometimes with disruption. They want it organic, they want it pesticide-free. So all over people are now trying to show examples of what this is the Eden project in Cornwall in the UK, which again is a great demonstration of green living, which is about creating different environments, little mimicking different parts of the world, showing new technologies, new materials, which can show the direction for the future. And we have examples, not necessarily in material, but also in terms of lifestyle things. This is the social system of that evolved in Auroville, where in Auroville they've actually modeled it around the spiritual core, and it spins out to the outside with the Mahatma Gandhi Center. And Auroville, of course, has also become a hub of innovation and technology, trying to push the boundaries on new living and sustainable living. So the examples from all around the world trying out floating cities or green towers and green buildings around the place. People like Gaudi have tried using innovative methods, things. So we virtually need a new combination of an artist and a technologist, people like Gaudi, to actually do. And there are people who are trying various examples, drawing from nature through biomimicry, pushing the agenda. This is like trying like natural cooling systems run through the building, doing biomimicry like what Gary had tried. Of course, this is mainly just in form. Exploring structural systems like Calatravas. But there's a great history of actually really innovative buildings, even from the past. So especially in the Middle East, you see these mud buildings, which are enormous, sometimes 8 stories high. And you see various sort of experimentation using local materials, responding to local climates. In Bhutan, of course, the sort of buildings that are shaped by their lifestyles. In Egypt, Hassan Fathi's work to respond to the climate that there is and where they handle their ventilation, the materials that use for construction. In Ladakh, Sonam Wanchuk, and how the heat buildings. And even at an individual level, we see architects and designers actually pushing the boundaries and trying to show a way forward. This is the work of Revati Kamath, and trying to push that agenda in her own way. Neela Manjunath and the really innovative buildings that she's experimenting with. And even people who are not architects, like Didi Contractor, tremendous inspiration, especially to young architects, in pushing this agenda of the green building. We ourselves, as architects, are trying to do it in our own small way through our own center. So we're part of an initiative called Design Valley, in which we have formed our own little community of designers and architects. And we've got 3 buildings, which is the design center in the center, the architectural building, and the product design building on one side. And they form a community with a lot of our residences, other architects and designers around. So that's the 3 buildings that we have here. And at the side, we've got a large tract of land, which is the permaculture area. And we've got our office in the center, which really is off the grid, and it powers all our buildings with solar energy. And the buildings there and the inside spaces of the buildings. But as I said before, even the whole practice is not just about the building, it's all about creating communities. So using our buildings and all the space we have, we run programs to deal with growing food, about energy, about community efforts, about the arts, and sharing ideas as one. So our role as architects is not just about responding to design and building things. It's all about actually building the world around us, sharing all that we know with the communities around, and bringing communities together. Thank you.
Before you start, I just want to tell to all the participants that I worked under Dean de Crusser in 2001, and we all know that there are very few legendary architects in India. And of course, Dean de Crusser is not only a great architect in terms of designing, but he is such a wonderful human being. I personally experienced, like, like to be a great architect, you first have to be a very good human being, and I really say Dean De Cruz is like that, like because he is like that, that's why he's into so much of social and so much of responsible activity. So and definitely I owe my initial year of learning to Dean De Cruz sir, and thank you sir for coming here and giving such wonderful your wisdom on architecture.
Yes, I think learning from our teachers has always been a very enriching experience. Like Dean De Cruz sir mentioned some of his teachers, and you learned from him, and now you're teaching some students. I think if knowledge gets passed down like this, I think we will have some very good societies to live in, like some of the societies that sir showed us in his presentation, and we can definitely look for a good positive future. It was a very interesting to see the variety of work that you do. It's not just architecture, it's not just building communities, it's not just urban design, but it looks at all of it as one human occupation, and as a part of our everyday life. I think that is something that we can all learn from, not just you, but also some of the other architects who have been presenting their work. Uh, and I think, even now students we have scheduled this webinar at a stage where students are designing Vipassana Kendra, and some of them are designing a house in the second year. And I think these ideas of using technology, of using social spaces, of creating spaces that integrate our lives with nature, I think will really, really impress them and should inspire them to create such designs. I had a interesting discussion that you told about the shack in Taj. I felt the roof for it was very interesting, and I think it had a fabric underlining. It looked very interesting. Can you tell us a little bit more about that particular building?
Yeah, the fabric is unfortunately not from Spain or Italy. It's made it's made locally. It's just jute bags. So the lighting is PVC pipes, which are cut, painted blue inside, drill holes. It costs 15 rupees a light. So so it's a question of just being sensible about things. A lot of times we just look at catalogs and pick up all these fancy looking stuff, and half the time you're paying some manufacturer, designer, and you're not really paying the real value of it. So it's important to innovate along the way and see what you want to achieve and use whatever. If you can use waste, great. If not, use something that's very simple and innovative. So, I mean, just a simple water pipe can become a light, So it's very important that you actually question these things. We've lost our design ability now with the whole supply of all these material suppliers. They come to you with all these fancy catalogs, and you buy from that and you choose. So when our role as architects has become minimal, we should just be, what do you call it, some sort of inner trader, broker, in between all we're doing is pointing out, use this, use that, and everything. We stop designing. So I think it's important we actually go back to the drawing board and say, what do we want? How can we actually, get down to the brass tacks of building up from the bottom and use materials which are appropriate. Look at what's available around us and see what's economical to use. So that's extremely important to do, and not go back to this thing of ready-made products. Now we're not architects. We don't see a building where just people assemble things. Window system comes from this guy, door system comes, flooring system. Now even all you're designing is the floor plate, especially multi. You just design the floor plate, and everybody else does the rest of the design. So I mean, our role as architects has become quite silly actually. We've lost the ability to design that.
I would like to invite Sir Malaksingh sir also. We would love to have a joint panel discussion. And
so Mahesh, and for the just for chatting, that I had also applied to Dean when I was a student to work with him. Unfortunately, I was not as lucky as you, Mahesh. So I didn't get through.
No, Malak, you're much luckier. Don't worry.
No. It's finally I met him recently a few months back, and It's really such a pleasure to meet someone as warm and humble and grounded as Dean. It's amazing. You've been an inspiration to all of us, Dean. Thank you so much.
Sir, hello, Malaksingh sir. Actually, I didn't apply. I directly went to sir's office. Directly standing in front of door with my portfolio, and I directly give interview. That was the entry. I never. So I was fortunate that sir liked some work and he took me. So it was a great experience learning them.
This is a prescription for all the people who want to work with these guys, because I had the same experience with Costford and Lorry Bakers. They wouldn't, just because they had probably so many people applying, and I just landed up in Trivandrum or at their doorstep because they never replied to my mails. So it's the same story. I was standing at their doorstep.
Sir would have replied, but he would have not taken.
No, actually, I wanted to work with Mahesh because he had come straight from Hafiz Contractors' office, and I thought maybe I'll get some multi-story building to design.
Wow. Yes, wonderful stories always.
And really, when you work under Dean, under Dean and Dean's office, you really get an opportunity to work on site. Like the whole responsibility sir gave on you to so it really builds your moral and develops your confidence. So it was a very nice to work in such environment. And I will like to share. Sir will not share. Sir has a lot of fascination for technology also. Like he likes all automobiles and car. And he is also liking nature, so he is merging technology and nature in such a way that it is a win-win solution. And he utilizes technology, and even in his work, which is the latest work, I see that a lot of technology has been used for saving nature, and that is a very nice move, which I am seeing sir's work. So thank you, sir, for sharing your work.
So there is one point I would like to ask. There seems to be a lot of research that your office does in not just in architecture, in urbanism, and many other areas. So how much of your time is dedicated to research, and how much goes into probably other buildings, or what we call as architecture?
So a lot of our early work, actually, there's a fair amount of research. Like even say for the spa, which I showed you for the Taj. We actually spent 2 months of research work. So we went to Kerala, we documented, say, the snake temples, we looked at things. So we looked at what the spirit of the spa was. So in that building, we designed everything down to virtually, the menu, the potty area, every single light was, designed by us. And that came after researching, how we're dealing with how we're drawing things from the past, contemporizing them. And so it's important. Research is an extremely important component. But as offices grow, it's more and more difficult to do research work. Your offices, you see suddenly after some time, they tend to, chalo, drawing number so-and-so nikal do. We'll use the door from that building, we'll put it into this building, So it's, you never really get to evolve and thing which is really unique to that particular house, whatever. You start standardizing things. Whereas research allows you that ability to fine-tune a building exactly what it's needed, for the space. It takes a lot of time, and unfortunately, it's not rewarded enough. I mean, what we charge as fees for the architects is a pittance compared to what an architect really should be paid. Because if one is paid correctly, it's a great amount. In America, for example, the fees for an architect is 12%. Here, people struggle with 4% even trying to convince a client.
True.
So how does if we are rewarded enough effort to be made into research and put into research, and our buildings would be definitely far richer.
This from Suneet Salvi. Thank you, Mr. Singh and Mr. Cruz. The feeling today that sustainable buildings is 1x or twice the cost of conventional structures. This itself makes sustainable building unviable. Could you please elaborate on the cost of sustainable buildings versus conventional buildings?
So really, I mean, it's a fallacy about, sustainable buildings costing more. Now, if you're using what the lead tells you to use, whatever, on this material and this air conditioning system, yes, for sure, because they're making money on you. They're putting all these fancy materials with green chappas on them, and that's not the green building really. It's for people who don't understand. I mean, as I said, it's, all these building rating systems are like the ABCD of things. It's meant for you to point you in a direction. It's not to tell you what to do. It's all about being sensible about things. So if you're using all these certified chapa things, then yeah, it will cost more because they're trying to make almost money off just lack of knowledge on what is needed. But if you're sensible about it, you will actually use materials which are far more appropriate, and it'll actually be the same or less, and one of the easiest approaches to actually creating a building which is sustainable and green is creating hybrid systems. So if you are looking at, say, natural materials are bringing about a certain economy to the place, use natural materials, but use it in an appropriate place. So what's happening, say, in Southeast Asia, for example, we're seeing a hybrid architecture where the structure of the building has technology built into it. Maybe a concrete frame, a steel frame, whatever. And then infill walls are just, a thin plaster lat, mud thing, whatever, or, a bamboo finished thing or some other natural material, which is infilled into the building, which you can renew every 5 years, 10 years, whatever. So the building is always fresh. But your services and your structures taken care of, that's solid. And so you need to look at systems of that thing. And yet what we produce today is something so, we think it's efficient, this double glazing thing, or this reflective glass and everything. And we've lost the traditional thing that you don't need that. I mean, just naturally ventilating it using natural cooling system can achieve the same. And luckily, this pandemic has brought us down to our knees, in the sense that all this air conditioning and all suddenly it's falling apart because people are scared of air conditioned spaces. So now they want naturally ventilated spaces. So it's great that we have an opportunity to actually say that, let's go back to more, reliable systems and more healthy systems. And so I think it's a great time for us to redefine the Terry Greer, redefine the lead rating systems, and
so true,
and get them to say that this is what is needed. It has to be economical, because remember, money is all about how much resources you're using. No, it's about the energy that's gone into it. It's about materials. So the less money you use, I mean, when people ask me what's sustainable, I said something that's low cost is sustainable, because obviously you're using less resources. And the more human resource you use, the more manpower you use, again, you're introducing sustainability because you're supporting the local economy, you're supporting craftsmanship. So that's extremely important. I think Malak agrees with it a lot. And Malak,
completely.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, completely. Very well put, Dean. And so there is, there is actually should be we should call out this formal green sustainable building industry for not actually being cost sensitive or also sensitive to natural materials, because most of these products, like Dean put it, the Chapawala products, the branded and certified things, are really, if you look at them, they are neither biodegradable nor are they low on their embodied energy. Okay, so glass is a very high embodied energy material and it's very difficult to recycle these things. So while they are giving you the mathematics of energy consumed vis-a-vis thermal comfort, etc., they are not really ticking the boxes on being biodegradable, natural, generating local economy, which also Dean mentioned, and they're also not cost effective. So really, that is just becoming an option for the elite. And it's like the poem which Sahib Ludhianvi said about the Taj. He tells his beloved that mere mehboob kahin aur milakar mujhse. He doesn't want to meet her in the lawns of the Taj, because he knows that the means to make the Taj Mahal were unsustainable, and they were they really killed the craftsmen who made the building. So if it is a symbol of love, you should look deeper. So these green buildings are that Taj Mahal right now. Not affordable love stories. So you must look at what is not formal green but informal green, and which is in abundance. And Dean and me, we have an experience that it costs the same or even lesser than your conventional. Do realize that we have to compete with the same conventional building contractors and architects who are giving you the conventional buildings. So if we don't compete with them and make buildings sustainable, we will be out of work. But we have managed all right.
So I'd like to bring one point which we miss out when we look at green building, because a lot of time we talk about energy and materials and technologies. For example, the building which I showed, which is the Noida building, which is the hollow column, hollow beam system. We were looking at a walling system. We were looking at a thin walling system because we needed to be lightweight. So we had a choice of using, say, Rajasthani stone or vitrified tile, large format vitrified tile as a walling system. And logic will tell you, of course, Rajasthani stone, because it's a natural material and therefore we should use it. But we went into actually where we're getting the stone from, and we realized that 90% of the quarries, the amount of dust pollution, water pollution that takes place in the quarry, and the labor working there is bonded labor. They're there for life. They get the pittance of living. They're there. Their living conditions are terrible. And we suddenly realized that, okay, even though this may have higher embodied energy, the vitrified tile, the worker over there is getting a fair, salary, is treated well. The pollution is taken care of, no doubt to industrial method, but at least it's being taken care of. So it suddenly makes sense that the vitrified tile is actually far more sounder in terms of, sustainability than the natural stone. But it's a question of, but your Chapa system will tell you that, you must choose the vitrified tile, or, our logic will say that we will choose the marble. So you have to use your own intelligence and decide, from case to case, what is right. There's no one single rule that everything. So depending on location, yes, and somewhere else where stone is actually harvested well and it's dignified labor, then yes, the stone is appropriate. So you need to look at what condition you're getting materials from, the technologies. In a certain area, you want to improve the craft level of the area. Therefore, you'll take that extra step. It may cost you more, but you'll take that extra step to have more labor rather than less labor and use less industrial processes in the building thing. So it's up to you to actually understand it and make a correct decision.
Yes, I'll give you an example here. So we actually completed one building during this lockdown in a green zone over the phone. We completed a building which was exposed brickwork with mud mortar with filler slab over the phone, because and none of our sites really suffered any stoppage of labor, because all the labor is local. There is no migrant labor which is there for the conventional architecture. So just think about the cost which we are saving for the client, but also the well-being of the people who are working there. So they're from around the locality, right? So all our sites are on, and there is no problem whatsoever. They don't have to travel from somewhere and go to another place. So that again controls the cost. Also think about cost, as a recurring thing. It's not just a cost of building it, but what is the cost of, for example, right now I'm seeing buildings. I mean, I had to help someone get their flat repaired. A 60-year-old building, entire steel of their RCC slab is exposed. The building is now, it is open heart surgery. You can just prolong it for maybe 10 years, 11 years or something. But a timber building and mud building which I'm making will last for more than 100 and 150 years. And even after that, any kind of structural repair is modular. So you can easily take out a member, replace that, and the building will go on. So where does the cost question goes out of the window? I mean, even if RCC competes with these materials, one is it doesn't last long. Furthermore, you might, it doesn't even help if it lasts long, because then you're living in an oven for longer. So there are many questions which come along with sustainability. Also, cost is not just monetary cost. You might be paying with your health.
So there is a question from one student. It was an amazing presentation. The student is Ritika Popley. I had a question. All these local materials restrict the large spans. What if we don't want columns between our rooms? How do we tackle it?
If you don't want columns between your roof?
Between your room.
Between your room?
Yes.
Get a very good helmet for one. And so it depends on the structure. It's a very, vague question, because, you're thinking like an interior designer. I mean, interior designers always are disturbed by columns, and that's why a lot of Bombay buildings have fallen down, because they say, nikal do, beech mein kya hai iska, nikal do. So, it's structure and architecture has to be an integrated part of it. So there's no question of, and the thing is to understand, so what do you do, what's the purpose of your roof, what is the shape? So of course, nowadays architecture is, people want an architecture that's far more flexible. So the more voluminous the space is, the lighter the roof is, gives you that possibility of actually creating an architecture which is flexible, which can change with time, which is dismantleable. We need to look at an architecture which is able to allow for that freedom of expression. In the old days, buildings, nowadays, in fact, buildings get redundant in 20 years because we design them so specifically. Therefore, we have these questions of, we have to remove this column, otherwise I can't modify it. Our uses are changing constantly. Look at malls. I mean, they've hardly lasted 20 years in the history of malls in India. Now people want to convert them into hospitals and schools and everything like that. The typologies are going to change. So yes, we have to build in a flexibility into the architecture so they can have different uses over time.
True.
So, yeah. So
also about this question about local materials restricting large span. So I think the approach is not about being rigid about using only local materials. I think from what Dean also spoke, it is now the time of hybridization. It's now the time of using whatever you can use from local materials, and then whatever is necessary, you may have an industrial material and put them together. Classic cases, so you talk about a big span and you can have a truss made out of bamboo, and the tensile stress of bamboo is comparable to steel. Now my point is that if you can't do it in timber, is it necessary to jump directly to steel? The point is look in between, and you can also do composite buildings. So if you have a timber beam, which can say, with which you need to span, say, 10 meters or something. If you put a steel, just a simple steel plate under it, it becomes a flitch beam, and you can reduce the size of the timber beam by 25%. The point is that where is our research focused? Is our study really focused at finding sensible alternatives, or as Dean said, just looking at the market, for end products? So I have a large span. What can the market of construction materials give me? So I will obviously get what they want to sell, and where there's more profit down the line. But if you make an effort as a designer to say that I want to use local materials, how can I hybridize it, use it along with something which is industrial? It's okay. Do a combination, also thinking of how it can be maintained and how it's recyclable. So there are many solutions in between for doing large span, structures. So it's not about not using industrial materials, modern industrial materials. It's about how sensibly you approach and use them in their optimum way. The other thing is also understand that some things come with the scale of the building. If you have a very large scale of anything, it's not appropriate to say that you can have Dara Singh do karate. It doesn't make sense. If there is a large scale building, you must think of the materiality in the context of a large scale building. And it is not the obligation of natural materials to fulfill ambitions of, you can make what is that, Burj Khalifa in Dubai or something, and complain that you can't do it in large scale buildings. Watch what you want also. Let me put that very clearly. First, also justify the need of these kind of buildings, and why there is a scale associated with with natural materials and what natural materials can do in terms of scale. There is a relation, and that relation, which is a limit or which is a constraint, has a lot to do with sustainability.
So there is a question from Parnavi Hapde on the Google chat. The coastal areas have been badly hit by cyclones recently, and after reading some interviews of people from Konkan, Sundarbans, we see a lot of people aspire to build concrete houses because they have seen these houses staying strong in these calamities. How do you think should architects design in these areas? Do these areas need large-scale ecological planning instead of just rehabilitation of people till they are hit by the next cyclone?
Oh, this is a very, very good question. You see, understand one thing, that after what happened in the Bhuj earthquake, people realize that what is your problem, whether your property is destroyed or whether your life is lost. Because when this RCC building falls on you, there will be a loss of different kind. And if your roof flies away, there is a loss of a different kind. So these are very, very different questions. It's very interesting of how a building should be categorized as safer or having lesser nuisance value when it is damaged by such events, whether earthquake or cyclone or anything like that. See, like I also said that what will happen if there is a lot of buildings are damaged and roofs fly, etc., etc. There are ways of planning. We are. Let me also share over here that many of the buildings which we have done also had few Mangalore tiles fly off. Okay, but these were Mangalore tiles. It was one day's work. And if you see the work I do, it is only all of these are Mangalore tile roofs, most of them. There is no RCC. And wherever they flew, and we know exactly what is to be done to prevent them from flying for the next time. One is all the tiles on the edges can be screwed. The other thing is if you have a ceiling under the tiles, then the wind pressure does not develop into that to push the tiles out. The third thing is if you know that a region is prone to such things, you can plan for it. And you can design your building in such a way that if there is a strong wind which comes in from, say, an area where it develops a wind pressure from under to damage the roof, it's a very simple thing. So we have done it. Let me tell you, one of the buildings I had shown you was on the coast of at Kudal, okay, with a 180 degrees sea from a cliff. There's nothing in front of it. There's a cliff and then there's a big Arabian Sea. And it survived the cyclone. There was just a few tiles which flew off. It was because we designed it in such a way that the wind pressure does not develop, and we actually kept those opportunities for the wind to escape from the opposite side, because we anticipated that there will be normally strong winds from the sea. So instead of resisting it, we designed to allow it to go through. So one is when you're contemporizing let's say indigenous or rural architecture, you must factor for all these considerations. But also, if you're absolutely learning from the vernacular, please try and note the buildings which have been damaged and the buildings which have survived, and please document the difference between their roofs, the slopes, the angles of the roofs, the heights of the eaves from the ground, the presence of vegetation around their houses, so breaking of the wind speeds because of that. Also, let me tell you one thing. When we say natural building, vernacular, regional technology, it's not just the building. It is the habitat. So if you say that, it's a very different problem when I have to do a farmhouse in an open kind of field for someone and use this technology. I cannot assume that it will be as safe as a house in a village which uses this technology, because the houses in the villages use the proximity of other houses, the trees, the gradient, on which the settlement has been planned. Everything works to their advantage to protect them from these kind of strong winds. So it cuts the wind speed, it protects one from each other, it dilutes the wind speed, dilutes the sun. So settlements and what you learn from them may not be directly applicable to the kind of technology which we use for. We are actually in a way trying to adapt the vernacular into our buildings. So we should be very careful with our ambitions, and therefore whatever the settlement cannot give us, we should factor for that in our design in a very, very minute way, which is what also part of what Dean was saying, that you have to research these aspects to not leave the clients out in the open, not throw them to the lions, if I may say that.
So another slightly different question I wanted to ask is, in your practice, how big is your office? I mean, how many number of people work there? It's quite I am interested because somehow I feel once the practice goes beyond a certain number, is it difficult to control and keep innovating into your practice?
Okay, so I grew from virtually a one-person practice into a 40-person practice, and now we're down to I think how many six-person practice with the pandemic. So it's while at 40 we consciously decided that things were getting bad in the sense that you start standardizing on staff, the quality goes down. We consciously moved down to like a 20-person practice because we had 40-person practice. I didn't have enough computers, so I started working 2 shifts. So one shift will start like at 7 in the morning, and at 2 in the afternoon. Another shift will start at 1 o'clock, so an overlap. And I realized I was working from 7 in the morning to 7 in the evening.
Midnight, yeah.
So that lasted for just a very short time. But you realize that that's not the way. I mean, that's like a production house, which a lot of the larger practices end up in doing. You lose quality, and there are some offices that manages still, but it's not the way we should practice as architects. Yeah. And I think it's important that you realize this. Yes, it's good to experience it, but you realize it and you put your priorities together. What is for example, we also started doing large houses. Like we've done houses for the Malya, Singhania, and Duyas, and all sorts of large, for us now, very embarrassing. At that time, we're very proud of it, but now very embarrassing to do. So it's, you realize that, okay, fine, it's a great learning experience. Yes, it's nice to have that thing, but do you want to do that all your life? It gives you good money, but it's not really worth it. Yeah. So these are decisions that you have to make along the way and say that, okay, fine, this is my priority. I can experience it, and once you experience it, you start deciding on what you really want to do. And unfortunately, most of us are very urban centric. All architects is urban centric. It's for the rich, and very few people actually dedicated to the lower sections of society, and that's extremely important. So like doctors are, there's a law that doctor must do 2-year service in the village area. So I think in architects also must have that. Before you get your degree, you must do 2-year service in some rural area. Because not only are you serving society, but you're also learning. You're gaining a lot from what rural technologies are, rural lifestyles are. So it's extremely important that is integrated into our whole learning that we have. And I think that's where we're losing out on sensitivities and things like that. So larger practices tend to lose, that thing. Some smaller practices are far more agile. They're able to just think. And what we've done now is actually a lot of the people who worked with us before, we actually farm out. So rather than grow again, if we do get a large project, it's with people that we've had before, who know the style of working, who know the approach and the methodology or the aesthetics or the ethics that we incorporate in the project. So that's the way I think the practice should be, where it's a collaboration of different people, bring different strengths on board, depending on the sort of project that they're choosing. So we're much poorer now at 6 people, but we're much happier. I still drive a Nano.
So I guess that question doesn't apply to me because we are not a very big practice. But we have learned, we have really taken advantage of the experience of the stalwarts like Dean, and so we have decided not to grow that big in a very conscious way, and we have decided to, so to avoid the added computer and larger office problem, we have decided to tie up with enthusiastic youngsters who are now many all over the country, and we tie up with them, we associate with them, and we give them the responsibility of handling a project where we are in a way the technology and design partners, where they learn by working with us, and we handhold them through the execution. So they also learn, and we also don't have the burden of managing a larger office and more employees and stuff. Because it's very difficult to say no to, one is good projects, because that's why you trained, in the hope that you can spread this kind of work around. Of course, Dean is done and dusted with that, and now on the other side of the curve. But yes, we are facing that problem now. and we are consciously keeping ourselves small so that we don't compromise on the quality. But in a different way, we tie up with individuals where as associates rather than employees, where we put the responsibility on them, and then they take care of a few projects, and that helps us also. We don't have to travel far away to keep supervising a site and stuff like that, especially with the pandemic now. So that's the policy we are employing now.
Thank you, sir. I think it's better to be richer in terms of experience and way of life, I think, than just accounting for money. And that is something that even communal life and rural life will always teach us. Uh, uh, we have had a wonderful experience here listening to both of you. Uh, Listening to your experiences and hoping that we don't make the mistakes that you have made, and we someday would reach the levels that you have reached in the wonderful work that we have been able to see in this evening. uh, Unfortunately, we'll have to bring an end to this evening today, but we look to continued cooperation from both of you to us with our students and with our college. And thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you. And please make the mistakes again. It's important to make the mistakes.
Yeah, so
Only make
hopefully
sure they don't last too long.
hopefully we make our own. I would like to welcome Pulkit sir to end this webinar day with his thank you note.
Yeah, such an insightful session, sir, Dean, sir, Malaksingh, sir, and I can actually see how people, students, all the participants are actually taking so much from these webinars, because what I see in architecture, that is empathy and honesty in architecture, that actually I and all the participants have seen in here. We are somehow stuck in this virtual medium, but we would like you to have such more sessions, which is more hands-on once this COVID situation is done. And we would like to have more of these collaborations where students and can actually take part in, like Dean sir said, the mapping projects of it, and so that we can build a gap between the academia and the profession. So I am really see all the participants. I thank both the speakers from our VES. Uh, we thank all the teachers who have contributed towards this webinar, and all the participants. Day 2 of the webinar is now concluded, and we will definitely start with our third day of webinar, that is from 10 a.m. tomorrow, and we have more speakers with us. And I thank you all the participants. I thank you all the faculty members, the technical team, and the VES trustees to provide this platform where we can actually have a one-to-one discussion with the professionals and the academia altogether. Thank you all.